The Falklands War against Argentina established her irrevocably in the public mind as the new Britannia, a warrior queen who gloried in victory.
PragerU, subtle as always. Fucking hell. Oh, Jesus. Salute on, my lovelies. I must confess, I'm always trying to think of strange new video experiments. When you've been in this here racket as long as I have, you do try to think of different things to do. And ironically, despite it being one of the laziest and simple kinds of content there is, I don't think I've ever actually tried to do a bog standard reaction video. It actually took a bit of thought to kind of think what's a good beginner video? What's like the lowest hanging fruit? What's the simplest, most basic bitch thing that's very easy to make fun of, where the comedy basically writes itself, where you'd have to be some sort of far right weirdo to not think there's something wrong about what's happening on the screen. Basically, I decided it would be easy to make fun of a PragerU video, and I'm not saying this will become a habit. I'm not saying other people haven't done it better. But for those of you who don't know, PragerU is basically an oil billionaire media propaganda machine, which espouses pretty much the worst possible opinions on any given socio-political issue. They had to take down one video once for apparently accidentally being anti-slavery because they described an actual historical abolitionist as a radical anti-slavery abolitionist, and it's like that's the tier of content we're dealing with here. And I did a little fish around for a video that has relevance to me in some way, but also I don't think I've seen other people dunking on before, and I settled on, you might have seen the title already come up, I'm doing a bit of an OBS experiment here to make this work, Margaret Thatcher, the woman who saved Great Britain. And as a soy beta cuck who lives in Britain, I have some opinions about this video. Within 60 seconds there was just a kind of, and this is the thing I've got to warn you about very quickly before we start, PragerU has a high bullshit per minute ratio. You will not believe the amount of stuff that comes out in rapid fire succession from this content sometimes. So let's I'm bracing myself, despite having pre-watched it a bit, I'm still bracing myself for this one. So have a quick sip of water and then we'll begin.
If you think the world is a mess now, that just means you weren't around in the 1970s.
Very quick interjection just to say this was like the second I had a feeling that this video was going to annoy me a particular amount. Yes, everything's going fine at the moment in comparison to 50 years ago. Don't worry, everything is fine.
In Britain, where I grew up, the low point was known as the Winter of Discontent, a line borrowed from Shakespeare's Richard III. The inflation rate in 1975 was 27%. The trains were always late, the payphones were always broken, nothing worked.
I'm not going to defend the government of the 1970s. It's not a time period I know an awful lot about. It was before my time. However, given what we're about to encounter, I really feel like contextually they're setting themselves up for a fall here.
Worst of all were the recurrent strikes. Strikes by coal miners, strikes by dockers, strikes by printers, strikes by refuse collectors.
Wow, it really is just rapid fire. Okay, maybe people were striking because shit was bad. Maybe shit wasn't bad because people were striking. I feel like you've got the order of events a bit backwards here, Prager. By all means, I will criticise the Labour leadership of today, for instance. I think Keir Starmer is a blue Tory. I think he's barely any better than the Conservatives he claims to. I think he's a liberal centrist Blairite who wouldn't be able to turn left if he was coming up to a busy junction. But yeah, I think maybe perhaps PragerU, you're getting your series of events a bit backwards here. Maybe when the government is doing a shit job and maybe corporations are walking all over people, maybe average people who actually work for a living, unlike oil billionaires, actually have no option other than to strike. And that's if they're even allowed to by the powers that be, such as oil billionaires.
Strikes even by gravediggers. It felt as if there was no way back. And then came Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, everything was going great as soon as Thatcher... Oh, for God's sake.
Between May 1979, when she entered 10 Downing Street as Prime Minister, and November 1990, when she stepped down, she changed everything.
I mean, I agree. Finally, PragerU, we agree on something. I'm genuinely trying not to pause so much, but there's so much to complain about already, and I'm really just... Oof. I can feel my blood pressure pumping already. I can feel we're going to get into some bullshit when it comes to defending Thatcher. I can feel it coming.
Born on October the 13th, 1925, she was an improbable saviour. Nothing in her middle-class childhood suggested the future ahead of her. A diligent student, she got into Oxford as a chemistry major. She worked for a small plastics company after leaving.
Hang on. Nothing about her humble beginnings suggested that she might become Prime Minister, except for going to one of the most privileged, high-class universities, certainly in the country, possibly in the world. Okay, fair enough.
Leaving college, but was rejected for a position at the British chemical giant ICI because, as the personnel report stated, this woman is headstrong, obstinate, and dangerously self-opinionated.
I can see immediately where they're going for with this. There's also a, what would you call it, a biopic film. I think it's called The Iron Lady, and it is very much like, oh yes, well, she did a bunch of bad stuff, but also she was the first female prime minister, and she was a real feminist icon, don't you know? Which is, I wouldn't call it an exclusively liberal thing to be kind of like, just because a politician is a woman or a person of colour or queer does not mean that they are in any functional way a progressive person. When and this is something that conservative pundits like to do is, you know, to their credit, to the Tories' credit, they've had 3 female prime ministers. Well, I'll say 2.5 female prime ministers because Liz Truss barely lasted a month. Whereas Labour has had 0 female prime ministers, and I'll give them credit. You know, why has Labour never had any non-male prime ministers? It's a very good question, by all means. However, if Keir Starmer was exactly the same, but not a dude, I would make all the same criticisms of him, and I would make all the same criticisms of Liz Truss, or fucking Thatcher, or Theresa May, if they had been dudes. So, you see, conservatives, we hate identity politics until we think we can. Well, I wouldn't even say that actually. They it's one of those things, like, conservatives say that we hate big government, but also the military and the police, we love that, you know. They'll often just say things which are not true beyond the surface level. Like, oh yeah, we love feminism, we love Margaret Thatcher. Oh fucking hell, I've stopped. I've hit my box in anger. I've stopped on this too long.
She needed all 3 of those attributes when she entered the world of politics as a Conservative candidate in 1950. After several failures, she finally entered Parliament in 1959. For the next 2 decades, she steadily worked her way up through the party ranks. As early as 1975, Thatcher had come up with a wonderful line about the opposition Labour Party. They've got the usual socialist disease. They've run out of other people's money.
Oh, you see, socialism is when you take other people's money, unlike conservatism, which famously, you know what I love about the right wing is they're so generous. They're always giving money to the poor. They're always, you know, funneling money to the people who need it. They're always helping out the average Jill, Jane, Joe, average. They're always just... They know exactly who deserves money, unlike us dirty commie pinkos who just... Okay, oh, the blood pressure, I'm telling you, it's not good for me.
This she contrasted memorably with what she called the British inheritance. A man's right to work as he will, to spend what he earns, to own property, to have the state as servant and not as master.
Yeah, that's great. Are you going to mention the fucking AIDS crisis, buddy? You going to mention how Thatcher, along with her best friend Ronald Reagan, presided over the mass death of queer people, particularly gay men, at a time when they definitely could have done more to help, rather than, frankly, actively made it worse through neglect? Or I wonder sometimes what at least hardcore conservatives like this think the state is, because they really do just kind of have this selective amnesia as to what they think a state is, you know. You don't have to be some far left anarchist to be critical of the state in some ways, and they really do just have this incredible grifter mentality where the state is everything they hate until the second it's useful to them.
This was the essence of Thatcherism, and it was just the tonic that the patient, the British economy, needed. It's fashionable nowadays to argue that there was no Thatcher miracle in the 1980s. Not only is that demonstrably false.
This is a minor point, but I swear PragerU, like hosts, always have the most insufferable smugness to them. It's like they've been told by the director to just act as pompous and unlikable as possible. This is a subjective point, I won't dwell on it.
It misses an essential point. Thatcherism wasn't just about raising productivity or creating jobs. Just as important was the goal of defeating inflation and restoring prosperity to the middle class.
Okay, depending on who you ask, the middle class doesn't exist, but this is very much I would consider myself a very privileged person in a lot of ways, don't get me wrong. I you know, if anyone is middle class, it's probably me. The socialist argument that a lot of socialists will make is that the middle class is an illusion. There are the people who have all the power and the money, and there's everyone below them, and if you are middle class, you're probably much more likely to become impoverished than you are to become a millionaire, you know. But Thatcherism, let's look at this quickly. Raising productivity, again, union busting, anyone creating jobs, unless you work in a coal mine apparently. Now again, don't get me wrong, I can see the counter argument here. Coal, shit stuff, bad. Fossil fuels, not a fan. But you don't just take people's livelihoods away and then, like, you know, she wasn't taking the coal mines away so that she could have green energy instead. No, she was just fucking over the coal mines for political purposes. And conservatives go on about creating jobs as if all jobs are equal, as if all people are able to work to their standard, as if all people... I think very few people are genuinely what you would call lazy. I think the whole laziness idea is very much a capitalist notion that we've all sort of internalized. Whereas most people, left to their own devices, if all their, like, you know, whatever, like, hierarchy of needs model you want to use, if most people have their basic needs met, they won't just sit around doing nothing. They will do something that they have passion and interest in. Why does anyone become a doctor? It's probably not to make a load of money, more often than not. I'm sure there are people like that, but if you want to make a load of money, frankly, you're going to rip people's mortgages off as a banker or something before you become a doctor, you know. Okay, we're halfway there.
This it emphatically achieved. Yet the event that more than any other defined Margaret Thatcher's premiership was not economic, but military. The Falklands War against Argentina established her irrevocably in the public mind as the new Britannia, a warrior queen who gloried in victory.
PragerU, subtle as always, fucking hell, oh Jesus. The new Britannia, a warrior queen who gloried in victory. fucking... The state is bad and should be kept as small as possible, except when it comes to invading places, then it should be as big. Now, don't get me wrong. Argentina invading the Falklands, that's a whole kettle of fish. Again, I'm not saying it's a simple issue, but it raises the question, why did Britain have any claim to the Falklands in the first place? It's a fucking remnant of colonialism, like all this shit. It's like, why do we talk about Gibraltar and Northern Ireland and all this shit? It's fucking leftover colonialism, and in some cases ongoing new neoliberal different kind of colonialism. You can say, oh well, Argentina, yeah, sure. I'm not defending the government of Argentina here, and I specify the government and military of Argentina. I'm not saying those darn dirty Argentinians. Obviously, I'm talking about the people who were making tanks move across the land and invading the Falklands, But, oh man, I was caught so off guard by this little cartoon Britannia of Margaret Thatcher. People who defend Margaret Thatcher are, in the technical term, the technical sense, sus.
And of course it ensured a Conservative win.
I paused it too early. I didn't realise she had a little sword. Even better. A+, 10 out of 10.
In the 1983 election. There's no question that sending the Royal Navy Task Force to the South Atlantic took great political courage. Many in her own party pushed for a negotiated settlement.
Yes, it took great political courage for a Conservative politician to declare war on someone. That wasn't politically convenient or well-timed at all.
But the lady was not for turning. Not because she was nostalgic for the days of empire, but because the invasion was, to her mind, morally and legally wrong. Not without reason did a...
Politicians never do things for personal or selfish reasons. That would be silly.
Soviet magazine nicknamed Thatcher the Iron Lady. Along with her ideological soulmate, US President Ronald Reagan, she was unhesitating in her opposition to the Soviet Union.
There's something remarkably dystopian about these PragerU cartoons. Like, taking an absolute monster like Ronald Reagan and turning him into this smiley little dorky Fallout looking character. Forget the fucking Cyberpunk 2077, the future is here and it's terrifying.
When the Soviets deployed intermediate-range nuclear missiles in Eastern Europe, she fully supported, despite fierce opposition, Reagan's countermove to send American cruise and Pershing missiles to Western Europe.
I believe it was Carl Sagan who said that the nuclear war, the threat of nuclear war is like two people stood in a puddle of oil, and one of them says, aha, they're having an argument, and one of them says, aha, look at me, I've got a match, be a shame if I were to light it. And then the other person says, aha, I'll one up you, I've got 2 matches, you don't want me to light those. That's always stuck with me.
It's still terribly hard for those who opposed her to admit it. But Margaret Thatcher was right about most things.
Oh, God. Ooh. Okay. Let's see what he has to say.
She was right that the British trade unions had become much too powerful.
Oh. Oh, you smug little man. You smug little... I mean, okay. PragerU is one of the only times you can safely assume someone's gender, because this dude... definitely a dude. They're not going to suddenly... I think their audience would throw a little fit if they threw anyone of gender ambiguity on the show. Sorry, that was a tangent, but man, this guy... Could they not have had him be normal? Could they not have had him be less insufferable?
She was right that inefficient, nationalised industries had to be privatised.
Oh my fucking god, okay. My entire life, certainly my entire adult life, privatised services in the UK, like the train services, are famously awful and inefficient. They are notoriously expensive to go anywhere. It costs me 40 quid every time to get a return ticket to go to London and back if I book a month in advance. Supposedly, in Germany, it costs about as much for a day ticket to travel anywhere in Germany on the train as it would for me to go to Scotland and back. It's just... Okay. Moving on.
And she was right, that the West could win the Cold War.
I guess that's too complicated of a question for me to Of all the things I've complained about today, this is a relatively mild one, so I'll let that one slide.
I can't bear Britain in decline, she told a BBC interviewer in April 1979. I just can't. Nor could we. For much of the 1970s, that decline had looked irreversible.
You know, I would like to know these people's opinion on the 12 years of conservative austerity followed by another fucking economic collapse like we've seen in the last year. How do they explain it? Oh, it's just because of this one particular event going on in Russia and Ukraine at the moment. No. Oh, it's because of the pandemic. No, it's because this is what happens. Conservatives drain ordinary people. They let their corporate buddies walk all over us. They crush unions. They act as anti-democratic as they possibly can while claiming to be for the working person. And I mention this specifically to make it more relevant because Liz Truss was supposedly this right libertarian, you know, the new Britannia, you could call her, a very Thatcher-esque neoliberal. Okay, you know, to be fair, a neoliberal and a right libertarian are not exactly the same, but they have that same idea of deregulation and let the market decide. How did that fucking turn out, Liz Truss? How are you enjoying your 100 grand a year for the rest of your life because you were Prime Minister for about a blink of an eye? Ooh.
Yet Margaret Thatcher stopped the rot. She cured the economy of the disease of inflation and industrial unrest.
Yep.
She revived
That
the
never happened
idea of
again.
a property-owning democracy. And with her courageous and principled
Famously democratic Margaret Thatcher.
foreign policy, she restored Britain's standing in the world.
LOL. Was this video made before Brexit? I mean, God, are they even going to address that actually? Because actually, one of the only oddities about Thatcher was that she was quite pro-EU, I think, famously. So I wonder how they're going to address that little pickle.
Those of us who stood by her are entitled to feel proud that we were on history's winning side. But we should have no illusions about the humble, supporting roles we played. She was the leader. Proof that sometimes it really is a single individual who can change the course of history.
I was wondering if they were just doing this little great man view of history fallacy. I mean, having an entire video about one leader like this is already a bit much, but I'd let it slide. But this, like, oh, she was so great. Oh, she was such an icon. She was the new Britannia. She, single individual, changed the course of history. No, only in a very unflattering sense could that be said to be true. You know, it is reductive as all hell, and it's considered an old-fashioned way of looking at history in the world to say this person, and it's usually a white dude, this white dude changed history. Oh, in this case it's a white woman. Oh, it's a white fucking conservative prime minister. Oh, good job. You know, Thatcher's administration changed Britain. We are still, you know, dealing with the defanged Labour Party that Thatcher's government arguably created by just crushing dissent, politically speaking, for a decade. And we're dealing with that again now because after a brief period of a revived Labour movement in this country under Jeremy Corbyn, and I'm not giving him single credit here, I'm just saying he was the leader of Labour during that time. After that brief couple of years, we're back with a fucking a Blairite Labour leader again. So sure, yeah, Thatcher's administration changed British history, and they affected the world. But I will stop you in your little kitty boots right here now, PragerU. You little kitty boots, more like your big fucking tyrannical authoritarian boots. And I'll tell you that Margaret Thatcher did not change the course of history. Fuck you.
In Margaret Thatcher's case, decidedly for the better. I'm Neil Ferguson, Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video.
Oh, thank you.
To help keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.
Yeah, I'm not going to let them plug their fucking little tax-deductible scheme. Here's an exciting point. I actually recognise the name Neil Ferguson, and I'm going to look up where I've heard that name before. So I'm just quickly looking Neil Ferguson up, not to be confused with the biologist and virus expert apparently. No, that'd be much too impressive for PragerU. He's actually a historian of world renown. His books include Civilization, The West and the Rest, which is already, whew, what a title to start off with there. He's also written a book called Kissinger, The Idealist, which is like, And he's got videos called Why the West Won and A Fine Time to Become an American, which is a hell of a thing to say, presumably under the Trump administration, where the far-right fascism of America that has always been bubbling under the surface was really just coming up from the depths of the earth and bubbling over. I like this little disclaimer that PragerU have. PragerU, supposedly university, have this little disclaimer that says, PragerU University is not an accredited academic institution and does not offer certificates or diplomas. You can't represent the cumulative views from both YouTube and Facebook. So I love how they have to put this little disclaimer that's like, oh yeah, we like to pretend to be a university, but we don't actually know what the fuck we're talking about. Well, this was fun anyway. Fun / highly stressful, I have to say. Oh, he's complaining in one tweet about he dismisses the claim that PragerU is an indispensable propaganda device for the right. Oh, he's criticizing the Southern Poverty Law Center on Twitter, called PragerU an indispensable propaganda device for the right, and Neil Ferguson is like, oh, fuck those, he says, the fraudulent Southern Poverty Law Center. Amazing. Anywho, this has been a little experiment. I thought it was pretty fun. I may have to consult my doctor about some heart problems I seem to be suddenly having on account of rage. But yeah, a good little experiment. Now, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go collapse and cry in anger to myself. That's what they want, though. You did it, PragerU. You triggered me with your facts and logic. You successfully walked into my living room, took a big shit, and upset me, and then went, aha! I've triggered you with my shats and logic.
Millions of birds, including endangered ones, dying, sliced to pieces by wind turbines.